She bought the bank that was taking his house. He never knew she'd been watching the night he gave away his last $40. It was an ordinary Friday in Cedar Hollow, Vermont. The kind that smelled of wet maple bark and diesel. Caleb Mercer had exactly $43 folded in the breast pocket of his flannel shirt. 40 of it was supposed to be for groceries. The other 3 were for the gumball machine outside the Mabel Spoon because his daughter Lily believed with her whole heart that the red ones were lucky. And Caleb had stopped arguing with her about luck. He'd lost his wife 11 months earlier. He no longer argued with anybody about luck. The diner was half empty that evening. Windows fogged at the edges. The coffee burnt the way roadside coffee always is. By closing, Caleb set Lily in the booth by the glass and ordered her grilled cheese, ordered himself nothing, told the waitress he wasn't hungry, which was a lie she was kind enough not to question. He was counting the days until his next job came in. He built furniture. Slow, careful, walnut and white oak, the kind of work that didn't pay until it was finished. And nothing was finished. That was when he noticed the woman. She was 3 booths down, alone. A coat too thin for November. She was crying the way people cry when they've decided no one is looking. Quietly. Efficiently. One hand flat on the table beside a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She couldn't have been much past 30. There was a kind of ruin in her face that didn't match her age. A cheap motel key on the table. When the waitress slid the check toward her, the woman looked at it the way you look at a thing you already know you can't pay. Caleb watched her dig through a wallet. Watched her count. Watched her come up short. He knew that arithmetic. He'd done it himself in the dark more times than he could say. So, he stood. He crossed the worn linoleum. And he set 2 20s down on her table without a word. The whole 40, the grocery money. They make you pay for the coffee here, he said. But the refills are free. Seems like a fair trade for a bad day. The woman stared at the bills, then up at him. Her eyes were red and furious and drowning. For a second he thought she might throw the money back in his face. Pride does that, he knew pride. But instead her mouth trembled. "Why would you do that?" she whispered. Caleb shrugged. "Because somebody should." He didn't tell her it was everything he had. He didn't tell her about Lily, or the empty refrigerator, or the 11 months. He just went back to his booth and gave Lily his last $3 for the gumball machine. She came back glowing with the red one, and he told her she was right. Red was the lucky kind. By the time he looked up again, the woman was gone. Through the fogged window he saw her standing in the parking lot beside an old sedan. Not getting in, just standing. Watching him through the glass. Watching him laugh at something his daughter said. She stood there a long time in the cold. Then she got in her car and drove away. And Caleb Mercer went home and stretched a can of soup across 2 days and didn't think about her again. He had no way of knowing she'd remember his face for 10 years. 10 years is a long time. Cedar Hollow did not get kinder to Caleb Mercer. The furniture business survived. Barely. He'd built a small workshop behind the house his grandfather had left him. 100-year-old farmhouse on 6 acres. Sagging at the porch, honest in the bones. He put a roof on it with his own hands. He'd raised Lily there. She was 14 now. All elbows and opinions. Smart enough to skip a grade and stubborn enough to argue with her teachers about it. The gap where her front tooth had been was long filled in. She still kept a red gumball in a jar on her windowsill. Neither of them ever mentioned why. The trouble came. The way trouble usually comes. Slowly. And then all at once. A bad winter. A canceled commission. A medical bill from the spring Lily broke her wrist falling out of the very oak the workshop was named for. Caleb had refinanced the farmhouse 2 years back through Cedar Hollow savings. the little regional bank on Main Street where his grandfather had banked. Where the tellers knew his name, it had felt safe. It had felt like home. Then Cedar Hollow Savings was bought by a bigger bank. The bigger bank was bought by a holding company. And the man who now held Caleb's loan was named Marcus Devlin. Devlin was a regional vice president with a corner office in Burlington and the smile of a man who had never once paid for his own coffee. He had a plan, though Caleb didn't know it yet. The 6 acres behind the farmhouse backed onto a parcel that a developer wanted badly. A developer who happened to be Devlin's brother-in-law. A clean foreclosure on the Mercer property. A quiet sale. A generous finder's fee routed through 3 companies, so it never touched daylight. All Devlin needed was for Caleb to fall behind. And Caleb had obligingly fallen behind. And Devlin had no intention of letting him climb back out. So, when Caleb came to the Burlington branch with a cashier's check for 3 months of back payments, money he'd raised by selling his truck, the good truck, and taking the bus, Devlin slid the check back across the desk with 2 manicured fingers. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer," he said in a voice that was sorry about nothing. "The note's been accelerated. We're past partial payments, the full balance is due, or the property goes to auction the 15th. Caleb sat very still. "The 15th is 11 days away. Then I'd start packing." Devlin's smile widened by a single degree. "Pretty piece of land you've got out there. Shame to let it go to seed." Caleb didn't raise his voice. He'd learned long ago that the men who deserved shouting were exactly the men it didn't work on. He picked up his useless check. He stood. "My grandfather built that house," he said. "And your grandson can build another one," Devlin said, already looking at his screen. "Somewhere more affordable." Caleb rode the bus home in the dark. He didn't tell Lily that night. He sat on the sagging porch with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands and looked at the workshop. At the oak. At 6 acres of his whole life. And for the first time since the diner 10 years ago, he did the arithmetic of a man who has come up short. He had no way of knowing that 200 miles away in a glass tower in Boston, a woman was reading his name off a foreclosure list and going very, very still. Her name was Eleanor Vance, and 10 years ago she had been the woman crying in the Maple Spoon. Back then, she'd had nothing, a failed company, behind her. A partner who'd stolen everything and left her name on the debts. A motel key and a tank of gas and a plan she'd been too much of a coward to go through with. Which was why she'd been sitting in a diner instead of doing it. A stranger in a flannel shirt had put $40 on her table. He'd told her somebody should. He'd gone back to laughing with his little girl, and something in Eleanor Vance had refused that night to break. She'd driven away. She'd found a reason. Over 10 brutal years, she'd built something the stranger could never have imagined. A private equity firm with her name on the door. The kind of quiet money that buys distressed banks and turns them around. The kind of woman whose calls got returned in minutes. She had never forgotten his face. She had looked for it, on and off, the way you look for a song you can only half remember. She had never found it. Until a routine acquisition put a small foundering bank holding company on her desk. Cedar Hollow Savings among its assets. And there, on a list of properties flagged for accelerated foreclosure, was a name. Mercer. Caleb. Cedar Hollow, VT. Eleanor read it 3 times. Then she pulled the file. And what she found in the file made her set down her coffee with a hand that was not quite steady, because the foreclosure was wrong, not unfortunate, wrong. The acceleration clause had been triggered out of sequence. The partial payment refused against the bank's own written policy. 3 shell companies circling the property like patient crows. Someone inside her newly acquired bank was stealing. And the man they were stealing from was the only person on earth who had ever shown her kindness when she'd had nothing left to offer in return. She did not call her lawyers first. She called for the jet. The car that pulled up outside the Mercer farmhouse on the 8th day was black and silent and did not belong on a dirt road in Cedar Hollow. Lily saw it first from the kitchen window and called for her father. Caleb came out wiping wood stain from his hands. He watched a driver open the rear door. He watched a woman step out into the gray afternoon. Tailored coat. Silver at her temples now. The kind of stillness that money buys and grief teaches. She looked up at the sagging porch. At the workshop. At the oak. She looked at him for a long moment with an expression he couldn't read. Mr. Mercer, she said. My name is Eleanor Vance. I own the bank that's taking your house. The words landed like a slap. Behind him in the doorway, Lily went rigid. Caleb's jaw tightened. He'd spent 8 days bracing for men in suits with clipboards and locks. He had not braced for this. A woman who'd driven all the way out to deliver the bad news in person, as if his ruin deserved a witness. Then you've had a wasted trip, he said quietly. There's nothing here to take that the bus didn't already make me sell. You can come back the 15th like the rest of them. He turned to go inside. I was in a diner once, Eleanor said, to his back. 10 years ago, November. I had nothing left. I decided I wasn't going to. November. I had nothing left. I decided I wasn't going to. She stopped, started again, steadier. A man gave me his last $40 and told me somebody should. He went back to his table and made his daughter laugh. I watched them through the window for a long time. I never got his name. Caleb had gone very still on the steps. Slowly, he turned around. Eleanor Vance was looking at him the way you look at a song you finally remember. It took me 10 years to find your face again, Mr. Mercer, she said. And I found it on a list of people my own bank is robbing. The wind moved through the oak. Somewhere inside, a jar of gumballs sat on a windowsill. One of them read. I didn't drive out here to take your house, Eleanor said. I drove out here to find out who's trying to steal it and to ask you one question before I do. Caleb's voice came out rough. What question? She held his eyes. Do you still believe somebody should? Caleb didn't answer her with words. He stepped down off the porch. He crossed the dead November grass. And he put out his hand, the calloused hand of a man who'd spent 10 years building things that didn't pay until they were finished. Caleb, he said, and that's my daughter Lily. You'd better come in out of the cold. Eleanor Vance had been in boardrooms where billion-dollar deals turned on a sentence. None of them had ever taken the breath out of her the way that handshake did. Inside, over coffee that Caleb insisted on making properly, she laid it out. Not gently. She'd learned that gentleness about money only ever protected the people doing the stealing. She put a folder on the kitchen table and opened it, and Caleb saw his own life rendered in spreadsheets. Your loan was never supposed to be accelerated, she said. Bank policy, my bank's policy now, requires a partial payment to be accepted up to 90 days past due. You were 81 days past due when you walked into that Burlington branch with a cashier's check. By the bank's own rules, the man behind that desk was obligated to take it. She turned a page. He refused it. Then he backdated the acceleration notice to make it look like he hadn't. Lily, who was supposed to be doing homework and was doing no such thing, said from the doorway, That's fraud. Eleanor looked at her and something almost like a smile moved across her face. Yes, she said. It is. Your father raised you sharp. What's his name? Caleb asked. The man behind the desk. Marcus Devlin. Eleanor's voice cooled by 10 degrees. Regional Vice President. Eleanor's voice cooled by 10 degrees. Regional Vice President. And he didn't do this alone, or for nothing. She slid out 3 more pages. Corporate filings. each one a company that owned a piece of the next. The way you nest boxes inside boxes to hide what's at the bottom. 3 shell companies. They were formed 8 months ago, all within a week of each other. All 3 are circling your 6 acres. And the last one in the chain, the one that would actually buy your land at the foreclosure auction for pennies, is run by a man named Gerald Pruitt. She paused. Gerald Pruitt is married to Marcus Devlin's sister. The kitchen went quiet. Outside, the wind worked at the oak. So he needs me to lose the house, Caleb said slowly. He needs the auction, Eleanor corrected. An auction lets him buy it cheap and clean, with the paperwork all looking legal. A foreclosure is a courthouse event, Caleb. It's public, it's fast, and once that gavel comes down, undoing it is a nightmare even for someone like me. She closed the folder. The auction is in 3 days, which means Devlin has 3 days to win and I have 3 days to stop him, and I can't just order it stopped. If I call Burlington tomorrow and pull the foreclosure, Devlin smells it, shreds what he can, and lawyers up. The shell companies dissolve overnight. He keeps his pension and his smile and finds someone else's land to steal next year. She looked at Caleb. I don't want to save your house. I want to end his ability to do this to anyone, ever again. And for that, I need him to think he's winning right up until the second he isn't. Lily looked from one adult to the other. You need a trap, she said. I need a trap, Eleanor agreed. Caleb set down his coffee. Then tell me what I have to do. What he had to do was the hardest thing of all. He had to do nothing. For 3 days, Caleb Mercer played the part of a beaten man. He let Devlin's office leave him voicemails about vacating the premises. He let the auction notice stay nailed to the post at the end of his drive. When a man from Gerald Pruitt's company came out to assess the parcel, pacing off the acreage with a long, confident stride, peering into the workshop windows at half-finished walnut he didn't understand, Caleb stood on his porch with his hands in his pockets and said nothing. He let the man go away believing the land was as good as his. It cost Caleb something to do that. Pride does. But he'd watched a stranger swallow her pride in a diner 10 years ago because someone gave her the room to, and he understood now that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is wait. Meanwhile, Eleanor worked. She did not work like a woman avenging a kindness. She worked like a woman who had spent a decade learning exactly how money lies. She brought in 2 forensic auditors and a lawyer who specialized in the unglamorous machinery of bank regulation. She had them go through Marcus Devlin's last 2 years, one transaction at a time. She made one quiet call to a contact at the state banking division, not an accusation, just a question, the kind that makes a regulator's ears prick up. And she discovered, 3 layers down, that the Mercer farm wasn't the first. There had been 4 others. A dairy farm, a shuttered mill, an old church camp, a widow's lake house, all accelerated out of sequence, all auctioned cheap, all bought by a chain of shell companies that dead-ended at a brother-in-law. Devlin had built himself a quiet little machine for turning other people's heartbreak into land. He'd run it for 2 years. And no one had ever connected the pieces because no one had ever been able to see all the pieces at once. No one until the woman who now owned the whole bank. We don't go to him with the Mercer file, she told her lawyer, the night before the auction, in a Burlington hotel room with the city lights cold in the window. We let him walk into the courthouse thinking the Mercer deal is the cleanest one yet. We let him stand up to bid, and then we hand the whole machine, all 5 properties, to the people whose job it is to take men like him apart. The lawyer frowned. You could just stop the auction. Quietly. The man loses his racket either way. He could, Eleanor said. But the widow doesn't get her lake house back. The man at the mill doesn't get his name cleared. She turned from the window. When I had nothing, somebody could have helped me quietly and gone home feeling good about himself. Instead, a man gave me everything in his pocket in front of a whole diner and made it look like I was doing him the favor. Her voice was very steady. I'm not interested in doing this quietly. I'm interested in doing this quietly. I'm interested in doing it right. The morning of the 15th came up gray and clean over Cedar Hollow. The foreclosure auctions were held in a paneled room on the second floor of the county courthouse. The kind of room that had heard 100 years of other people's worst days. Marcus Devlin arrived early. In a charcoal suit, with Gerald Pruitt beside him pretending they'd never met. There were a handful of other bidders. A clerk. An auctioneer with a flat coastal voice. And there, in the back row, in his good flannel and the only jacket he owned, sat Caleb Mercer. Because Eleanor had asked him to be there, and because he had decided he was done not being in the room when his life was decided. Nabbit. Devlin saw him and smiled the single-degree smile. "Mr. Mercer," he said, sliding into the row in front. "Came to say goodbye to the old place? Sentimental. I respect that." He lowered his voice to something almost kind, which was worse. "For what it's worth, nothing personal. It's just land." "My grandfather built that house," Caleb said. "You mentioned." Devlin straightened his cuffs. "And as I recall, I told you your grandson could build another." The auctioneer called the room to order. Properties moved through fast, a backlot, a repossessed duplex, and then the clerk read the file number for 6 acres and a farmhouse on Hollow Road. Gerald Pruitt lifted his card. The bidding on Caleb Mercer's whole life opened at a number that wouldn't have bought the oak tree. That was when the doors at the back of the room opened. Eleanor Vance walked in. She was not alone. Behind her came her lawyer. Behind him came 2 people in plain dark suits with the unmistakable bearing of officials. Behind them came a woman the regulator had brought, an examiner from the state banking division with a thick folder under her arm. The auctioneer faltered. "Ma'am, this auction is suspended," Eleanor said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "I'm the principal owner of the institution that holds this note, and I'm exercising the institution's right to withdraw the property, pending an internal review." She turned, and for the first time looked directly at Marcus Devlin. The temperature of the room dropped. "Hello, Marcus. We've never actually met. You've been a busy man." Devlin stood up too fast. "I don't know what you think this is, but you can't just—" "I own the bank, Marcus." She let that land. "I can do almost anything I want with the bank. What I can't do, what nobody can do, is undo a federal crime." She nodded toward the 2 in dark suits. "These are investigators. They've spent the last 72 hours with a file your name is all over. The acceleration you backdated, the partial payment you refused against written policy, the cashier's check Mr. Mercer brought you. Which, by the way, we recovered the security footage of you sliding back across the desk." She tilted her head. "Would you like me to go on in front of everyone? Or would you prefer to do this in a smaller room?" Gerald Pruitt was already edging toward the aisle. One of the dark suits stepped sideways, unhurried, and Pruitt stopped edging. "The dairy farm," Eleanor said, and now she was counting on her fingers. Slow, merciless. "The Hartley Mill. The church camp on Route 9. The Abbott Lake House. And the Mercer Farm. Number 5. She set her own folder on the auctioneer's table. 5 families, Marcus. 5 times you took a regulation and bent it just far enough and routed the money through your sister's husband's companies so it never touched your hands." She paused. "It touches your hands now." For a moment, Marcus Devlin's face did something complicated. The math of a man who has come up short and only now understands by how much. He looked at the investigators. He looked at the door. He looked at the door. He looked last and worst at the woman who owned the bank. "It was just land," he said, "and it came out small." "It was never just land," Eleanor said. "It was the only thing those people had left. The same as it was the only thing I had left, once. When a stranger decided I was worth $40 he didn't have." She didn't look at Caleb when she said it. She didn't have to. "You're done, Marcus." Not quietly. Not with a package and a handshake. Done the right way, in front of people, with your name attached, so the next man who looks at a widow's house and sees a finder's fee thinks twice. They took Marcus Devlin out a side door. Gerald Pruitt went with him. The paneled room sat in stunned silence, and the auctioneer cleared his throat and announced, in his flat coastal voice, that the property at 6 acres on Hollow Road was withdrawn. Somewhere in the back row, a 14-year-old girl who had absolutely not been told to stay home let out a breath she'd been holding for 3 days. It was not all undone in a morning. These things never are. The investigation ran for months. Devlin lost the suit and the smile and a great deal more. The brother-in-law's companies were unwound one nested box at a time. The widow got her lake house back. The Hartleys got the mill. It was slow, and it was legal, and it was, in the end, complete, which is the only kind of justice that ever really holds. Caleb's loan was restored to where it should have been. The accelerated balance erased. The cashier's check he'd raised by selling his truck applied exactly as bank policy had always said it must be. He kept the farmhouse. He kept the workshop. He kept the oak. And he kept, somehow, finding reasons that Eleanor Vance needed to be in Cedar Hollow. She had a firm to run 200 miles away, a tower full of glass. And yet the black car came up the dirt road more Fridays than not. She stopped wearing the tailored coat and started wearing one that could handle wet maple bark. She learned to take her coffee the way Caleb made it. She and Lily developed a friendship that mostly consisted of ganging up on him. One evening, Eleanor stood in the doorway of the workshop watching him run his hand along a length of finished walnut, the first commission he'd completed in over a year. And she said quietly, "You never asked me." "Asked you what?" "That night, in the diner. You never asked why I was crying. You just decided it didn't matter why." Caleb set down the cloth. "Didn't seem like my business why," he said. "Seemed like my business that somebody should." Eleanor was quiet for a while. Then she crossed the workshop. She stood beside him at the bench, close enough that the backs of their hands rested a half-inch apart on the cool walnut. Neither of them moved that half-inch. Neither of them moved about half-inch. Neither of them moved away. "You gave me everything you had," she said. "And you didn't even know my name." "I know it now," Caleb said. Outside, the November light went gold and low across 6 acres that were going nowhere. Inside, on a windowsill in a 14-year-old's room, a jar of gumballs caught the last of the sun. Among the ordinary ones sat a single red one, 10 years old. Lucky. Kept. Because a long time ago a little girl had believed in luck, and her father had stopped arguing. And it turned out, in the end, that they'd both been right. Eleanor's hand stayed where it was. So did his. Some debts you spend a decade waiting to repay, and some kindnesses given freely on an ordinary Friday with the last of what you have turn out to be the only investment that ever truly pays.